YouTube, what's up? Part 2. Part 2. Just continuation.
The cultural history of the Western Hemisphere prior to the advent of the European conquerors is so dim that even although in the last 50 years a great deal of work has been done, we are still in no condition or position to arrive at conclusions or to attempt a general reconstruction of the situation. Broadly speaking, there is much evidence
white in here
that the three Americas have been inhabited for a very long time. Some schools of modern anthropology are even speculating that the records of human existence in the Western Hemisphere may be as long and old as anything to be found in the Eastern Hemisphere. Be this as it may, we are almost entirely dependent upon so-called natural records. Through the excavation of mounds and the examination of ruins, we try to piece together the story of Amerindian culture. The possibility of Asiatic influence, or even European influence, cannot be eliminated, even when we think of comparatively early times. There is a general suspicion that this continent was populated from Asia. Certainly there were streams of migration over what we call the Aleutian Island chain and Bering Strait. But to me it has always seemed a little difficult to agree wholeheartedly with Dr. Hardlicka in his thinking in this direction. It seems to me that these ancient migrations do not explain the cultural pattern that existed here at the time of the conquest.
Medieval nights.
It would seem more probable that travelers, adventurers, perhaps shipwrecked mariners, did reach the western continents from some other cultured area, perhaps 2, 3, or 4,000 years ago. Something happened here that is not fully explained by any of the records now available to us. Considering, for example, the possibility of migration from Asia by other routes than those at the far north. We know that certain currents are such that it is quite possible to drift from Asia to the west coast of Central America. This drift would be very largely the result of currents which, however, are not so fortunate if the wanderer wants to drift home again. Thus, they would appear to have been the possibility of a one-way travel at a very early time from Asia. We also know that down in the Polynesian area, navigation by means of very large canoes was advanced perhaps further than we realize. We know that in these areas there are canoes that can and have traveled 3, 4, 5,000 miles. That all this western land could have remained untouched by any contact with Asia or Europe or North Africa from the dawn of time until the Columbian voyages just does not seem to make sense. We do recognize the probability that the early Nordic peoples reached the northeast coast of America. And if we may trust the records in Plutarch's voyages, Greek mariners may have explored the St. Lawrence River. Certainly things did happen. And these things left real and genuine marks upon the way of life in the Western Hemisphere. I have not as yet, quite intentionally, mentioned the Atlantic hypothesis. The possibility that an Atlantic culture may have actually laid the foundation for the civilization of the Americas. There is much to suggest in the legendary and lore of the primordial inhabitants of this continent that they were aware that their culture did not originate here. They have the world deluge myth in common with most other peoples of Asia and Africa. And they have a tendency in their recordings to think toward an origin lying to the east of the American continent. This origin does not seem to be fully explained on the possibility of direct contact with Europe. For at any time when this contact would have been reasonable, Europe could not have provided that which these travelers report. So some way we feel that a cultural impetus was given to this continent, or these Western lands,
yeah, part two. You too.
at
Way
a
too much I'm doing
time
today.
long distance. And that at the
I'm on
time
call
of
today,
this
so, you know,
cultural impetus,
waiting for that call.
it arrived
Enjoying myself.
from
Ding
people
dong. Ding dong.
already
like Tim Conway Jr.
themselves
says on
cultured.
KFI, AM 640.
If, for example, such a movement had occurred 10 or 12,000 years ago,
Ooh, that feels good.
what record do we have anywhere of a civilization
They're gonna be
that
done.
could have equipped
You might work a little
the
bit
Western
over here.
peoples for the rise of such cultures as that
I
of
think
the
that's it for that
Maya
color right there,
or
for
the
white.
Inca? We do not know of
Give
any
me the white,
such
too.
culture. This would be pre-Egyptian.
Where's that from?
It
I
would
know
be
you got
before the rise
Give me
of
the white,
Greek
too.
culture. It would be before anything we know of Chinese culture. It would even probably antedate any reasonable concept we have of Indic culture, which may be the oldest in the world.
A little more. A little
Thus, from the probable areas from which such contact
more. Gotta go buy me
could be
some more
made,
ink.
there was nothing that would have provided what these people claim to have received. Perhaps then they are justified in assuming that they brought this knowledge from a land or area which has since been submerged and lost to history. We do not wish to labor
That's it.
this
Yeah, it
point.
should stay.
Our main problem
Mom's
is to
ink.
try to understand how
the
certain
brand.
institutions,
Mom's.
almost identical
see.
with those of classical antiquity,
Learning here. I'm not going as deep as that.
which arose in the
I was
Western
before.
world and resulted in the Americas becoming part of a broad world cultural pattern. We know that prior to the Columbian voyages, that the peoples of America were not all savage. We know that Cortez, when he saw for the first time the city of Mexico, said that it was the most beautiful city on earth. He called it the Venice of the Western Hemisphere. And he said there was no city in Europe that was its equal. These people, therefore, had advanced far in art and science, and were gradually building themselves a solid political situation. This, however, was interrupted and was never permitted to mature. Yet we must also realize that the city of Mexico, with all its grandeur, with the Aztec-Toltec culture complex behind it, was relatively uncivilized in comparison to the great empire of the Maya lying further to the south. For if the Aztec peoples were coming into cultural maturity, it was because they had derived their inspiration and their guidance from the more